Hi, this is Steve, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Tech Leader Talk. Do you need help delivering compelling technical presentations? Well, I've got just the person to share some insights on that today. So today I'm talking with Don Colliver, who's a facilitator and communication consultant with over 20 years of experience. He's worked as a consultant for tech companies like Google, Cisco, Adobe, and IBM. And here's the interesting twist. Don is also a former theatrical clown for a circus, and he's performed with the Blue Man Group. He's also the author of the book Wink, which is about transforming public speaking with clown presence. So you might think that's an unusual combination, and I did too. That's why I brought him on the show, because I wanted to talk to him about this, and it's a great conversation. So Don's going to talk about how his experience as a clown and working with Blue Man Group helps him now when training tech companies and tech company teams, how they can give good presentations. So he's also going to talk about how you can present technical information without putting your audience to sleep. And he also shares the 3 questions that you must ask about your audience before you plan any type of technical presentation. So I know you're going to get some good tips and insights and funny stories from Don that can help you build audience awareness, increase rapport, and help you communicate technical information to your team, to your customers, to anyone. So let's get to the conversation with Don. Hey, Don, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Steve, thanks so much for having me here. It's great to be here.
Hey. So to my knowledge, you're the first clown that I've ever had on a professional clown on the podcast. I've had some clowns, but and someone who's worked with the Blue Man Group. So that's kind of an interesting background because my wife and I have seen that show quite a few years ago. But tell us how you got to where you're at today. How do you kind of go from how does that kind of work lead you into, or I guess align with teaching tech people how to do good presentations?
Sure. Well, it's been a weird kind of full circle thing. I mean, when I was a kid, I was one of those first folks. I got an Apple IIe, which I loved, dinking around with remember we had the 300 baud modem, then 1200 baud modem. And I loved that stuff. But then I got into, actually, because this was back in Detroit, got into automotive training. So I was training at a company, training salespeople for the big 3, but it was corporate training, video production. Mm-hmm. And then that brought me to Los Angeles. I started doing television production and also corporate training still. And all this time, I really enjoyed the soft skills training stuff. And there's a lot of that in sales training. And just through other random things in my life, I went through a divorce and a couple other things. I ended up taking an improv class, and just completely, purely not professional at all. It was just one of those things what's something that I can do that's just purely fun? Yeah. And it was one of those situations where it was kind of where's this been all my life? And I started pursuing that in comedy in Los Angeles, and just through pure love and passion, and ended up kind of good at it. Ended up on a main stage sketch team. Then I ended up, like you said, Blue Man. I was a touring clown for a company called Spiegel World. They run a show called Absinthe at Caesar's Palace. Some of your Vegas listeners who head out to conferences may be well familiar with Absinthe. It's a pretty racy show, and often one of the most popular, most sold out shows on the Strip. But I was the host clown for a North American tour of that. And kind of to bring it all back around, kind of the through line is I always loved engaging with people. I loved helping people engage with each other. That's a lot of what a clown does. You learn how to play off the crowd. And even all the way back to when I started in training, corporate training, it was a lot of engagement. And once I started doing the clown stuff, I was there's so much that especially technical people can benefit from this skill set. If I can just surmount the scary clown archetype, which like everyone totally gets it. I get it too. They'd scare the hell out of me, like Pennywise from It. But there are some tools that are like concrete tools you can put into action to make your technical presentations more compelling.
Okay. So you talked about engagement a little bit from the clown and Blue Man Group. What else? What experience did you get from that, and maybe from improv, that now helps you today to even do a better job of teaching tech people about giving good presentations?
Well, I teach at Google all the time. Like I'm in Redwood City, Mountain View's just up the street, and I'm teaching the most brilliant people in the world, and they're way smarter than me most of the time, and are actually all the time. Is that never a time that's not true? And but here's the thing: when it comes time to take a knowledge that you have and like impart it to other people, sometimes these brilliant people, that bridge starts to break down. And it's something to do with, I think, in a book called Made to Stick, I forget the author's name, but they called it the curse of knowledge. You forget what it feels like to not know something.
Yeah.
And that really gets in the way of communicating to an audience when you don't take into account the level of experience or knowledge of your audience. And that's really what I help these folks to do. And that's actually what Clown taught me, was because I'm obviously prepared with my bit or whatever, but I need to be ready to pivot and adapt to the audience once I get there.
Okay. All right. Interesting. So I've given technical presentations, and back to my days as an engineer and still as I'm explaining legal topics that relate to technology. What are some special factors that you need to consider when you're presenting technical information that's maybe different than other areas?
Well, there's always kind of the classic 3 questions that you want to ask of your audience as you're creating a presentation. Who's going to be in the audience? Meaning, what's their level of skill? Like, what definitions do you have to provide? So who's going to be there? Question number 1. Secondly, what do you want them to do? What action do you want them to take? So that's question number 2. And it can help to put it in a binary phrase, like where it's a yes or no. Did they do it? Did they not do it? You don't have to hold yourself and beat yourself up if you don't get it. And you don't even have to communicate that to the audience directly. But what it's going to do, it's going to give you a yardstick you can hold up to every part of your presentation. And you can ask, is this moving my presentation towards getting my audience to do what I want them to? Okay. And it can be a great editing tool. So first question, who's going to be there? Second question, what do I want them to do? And the third question, which is the most common one that takes a little work for developers and engineers and more technical folks, what's in it for them? Why do they care about what you have to say? And that takes a huge shift in point of view as you're creating your presentation, because you have to start thinking of, what are their problems? What are the drivers of those problems? What is the impact of those problems from their point of view? Because it's really easy for a manager of a team, or if you're presenting some kind of a status report with a project, to have your primary motivation to be, look at all the work we've done. And you got to shift that point of view of, why does the audience care? How is it solving their problem? How is it moving the needle for them?
Interesting. I think flashbacks to some of my early presentations as an engineer, and I probably didn't handle any of those 3 questions because as engineers, especially when I was talking with other teammates, it doesn't seem to matter what industry you're in. They've got their own acronyms. And I started working with a major networking company when I was doing patent work. And I swear their inventors couldn't speak a sentence without using at least two acronyms. So it was quite a learning curve for me. And when you're talking with your team, that's fine. It's faster. It's an abbreviated way to communicate. But when you've got to present, maybe even to your supervisors who don't know the acronyms as well, or to another group that certainly is maybe non-tech, yeah, that's step one. Who's the audience, and what kind of foundation do you have to give them? And something I had to unlearn was, I'm an engineer, and it was just data. It was just facts. So you just spewed out all this data and not looking at the benefits or things like that. It's like, here's all the data, or just assuming everybody else is going to look at the data and it'll be intuitive to them. When it's not, it's that curse of knowledge. Because if I've been working on it for 3 months, I've got some intuition on it that other people don't. So that's interesting. So how do you, if you come into a tech company and their typical presentation style has maybe not even considered any of these three questions, how do you kind of break the ice or start moving them towards your approach and understanding why they need to take a little different approach to their presentations if they want to be more effective?
Well, it's interesting. I'm a longtime Toastmaster, and Toastmasters is great, not because necessary. I don't want to look down on their curriculum or anything like that. It's fine for what it is. But here's the thing about Toastmasters: it gives everybody an opportunity to speak every single meeting. At least that's the goal, dependent upon the size of the club. And it gives everybody feedback all the time. You're always getting feedback.
Yeah.
And so I think low stakes opportunities to speak, and low stakes is critical. Like if you have one quarterly presentation and then everyone's like wringing their hands over it, like every couple months, that's not low stakes, and that you aren't necessarily going to get better. You're just going to learn to hate presentations if that's the case. But finding low stakes opportunities to speak. And this is really important for, I think, because I deal a lot with non-native speakers and folks who are dealing with serious anxiety, which is a very, very common thing, which I deal with as well. And sometimes just positive feedback is critical. Like a lot of us are used to performance reviews, and it's just like, give me the hard stuff. Tell me what I got. You know what I mean? But there's so much that we're dealing with that's a little bit softer than that when we're talking about standing up in front of a group and presenting. Sometimes all you need is to hear positive feedback for a few presentations, because I find that a lot of these like eye contact issues, filler word problems, really weird hand motions from nervousness, that's just going to dissipate with some positive feedback without anybody having to point it out. Just give them the opportunity, give them some positive feedback, and a lot of those things will fix themselves.
Interesting. Yeah, that's well, you mentioned Toastmasters. I was in Toastmasters for a couple of years, and one of the approaches, I don't know if this is for the whole organization or if it was just our club, but they called it the sandwich approach or something, giving feedback. You always complimented someone's presentation. Just what did they do good? What did you like about it? And then in the middle, you'd say, here's an area for next time. Maybe think about doing this, or this area was a little distracting, so work on this, and then finish again with a positive. So overall, it's starting and finishing with positive feedback and giving constructive criticism or a way to improve in the middle. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and people see that coming a mile away, but it's weird. It still works. Like even when I know, like I've heard it called a blank sandwich too, but it still works for me. Even though I know that constructive criticism is coming, I'll be like, thank you for giving me positive feedback, and thank you for buttoning it up with positive feedback. It works. I don't know. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. So when I was looking through some of your bio, some of your background information, you said that your passion is to engage with others and help them engage with each other. Why is that so important to you? Why is that your passion?
Man, well, this kind of goes beyond, helping folks in tech speak in more persuasive and compelling ways, but I think there's so much inauthenticity in presentations these days. And, just don't get me started on social media and the personas that we're putting forth, and then in news and politics, and people presenting things that are very inauthentic and rather manipulative at times. And I think when it comes to business meetings that we're talking about here, and smaller meetings as well as larger groups, I think the tenor of an appropriate presentation has changed. Whereas in the past, I think terms like clever turns of phrase and like erudite speaking and very using rhetoric, like kind of like a State of the Union address where every single word is perfectly poised and every pause is completely calculated. For me, if I'm in a smaller meeting where we're talking about technology or something, if I see that, I start to suspect. I'm like, what is this person? What's going on? Like, they're way too polished. What are they pushing on me? What are they not saying? Whereas if someone gets up there and is much more authentic, and maybe they even have some hiccups in their presentation, but they're transparent about it, they're passionate about what they're talking about, they're clear, they've done their preparation, I'm much more apt to listen and be convinced. So that's why I'm so passionate about this engagement.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Well, the people come across more, real, authentic. I used to use the word authentic, but that's.
I mean, Brene Brown has made a whole career out of talking about vulnerability. And vulnerability is not a real sexy word to toss around when you're talking about business presentations. So I usually angle it towards authenticity.
Good. That makes sense. So
neither is clown, to be frank.
So you mentioned the 3 questions that you'd ask earlier. What kind of benefits do you see for a company, let's assume they're in the technology space or another business, when they start having themselves or the team members take a look at these 3 questions? What are the benefits that you see that come out of that?
Well, I had a woman developer in one of my classes, and she wrote me a really nice recommendation on LinkedIn. And in the recommendation, she said she had a design review. I think it was near the end of my class with her manager and her manager's manager and a bunch of other things. And they came away with, it was the best dialogue in conversation that they had all year, that presentation. And I think that says a lot. Like, first of all, she did great. Second of all, you notice they didn't call it a presentation. They called it a dialogue and a conversation, which is really what I am working towards. And by that, I don't mean if you have a lot of data to get through, you're going to start a back and forth. No, but there's a way that you can present that feels that it includes the audience. It breaks that fourth wall, and it feels like you're all in there creating meaning together. And that felt like a real win for me.
That is interesting. I've sat through some long presentations, 30, 40 minutes or more, and it's all one direction. It's all out at the audience. It's kind of like, I could just be watching this on the screen. I don't need to be here in person.
Big time. Yeah.
So you're the author of the book Wink, Transforming Public Speaking with Clown Presence. What was the motivation behind the book?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was, I did that right at the tail end of the pandemic, and I had been teaching public speaking virtually at Google for the entire pandemic, teaching it a lot. And as I was going through those classes and refining what I was saying, refining the curriculum based upon feedback, I started realizing that the stuff I was teaching and the really big changes I was seeing, nobody else really was teaching this kind of stuff, because I was kind of bringing forth these elements of what I call clown presence, not clown, but clown presence, which is a more heightened state of engagement with your audience as you're presenting. Nobody else was kind of teaching techniques for that, as well as, how to build your presentation deck, like how to visualize data, that kind of thing. And so I wanted to get it down. And so, I wrote the book, and where I had talk about the 5 P's of embodying clown presence, which are personal confidence, preparation, partnership, imperfection, and play. And that's kind of what I go through in the book.
Interesting. So I talked with a lot of authors, and I'm an author myself. The process of writing the book, what more did you learn, or what insights did you have by forcing yourself to take all this experience and all your techniques and things and get them into paper or digital file?
Man, I'm sure. Tell me about your which books, what have you've written a lot of stuff, right?
I've written a lot of articles. My book it's called Cracking the Patent Code, and I wrote it during the pandemic, and it was a similar story to you. I have been working with tech companies for more than 20 years, and it kind of developed a system. I mean, there's lots of people have these systems, but some of them are, especially if engineers get involved, it's a 38-step system. Just do these simple 38 steps. Mine's 3. Now each of the steps has some sub pieces to it. It's like, I wanted to get this simple and to teach people kind of my system. But I had some insights and some for me, it was partly new ways to explain things and kind of put some terminology on it that made a little bit more sense. In the legal world, maybe it was clear, but most of my clients are not attorneys. They don't have any legal training. So using a bunch of legal jargon was a bad idea. So it was just kind of changing the explanation and just trying to simplify it even more to not make it intimidating.
Yeah. I had a similar experience where I think the process of moving through writing the rough draft, and then I invited in a developmental editor, who was extremely helpful, who did business books. And because as I was writing it, I would deal with the standard public speaking techniques, which are quite familiar to people. But once I got into the more clown presence stuff, it started to get a little bit subtle, I guess. And I realized this sounds a little woo-woo. I really have to take a step back and look for the research, find the studies that back this up, because I knew who was going to be reading it. And whereas that might work in acting class, this is a public speaking book for folks who have real business presentations that need to be presented. So that was kind of the learning process for me during that book.
Okay, that's interesting. So a lot of the listeners work with tech companies. Some are leaders in tech companies or leaders of groups within the companies. Suppose it's a listener is at some level in a tech company, and they're experiencing too many traditional, boring, non-engaging meetings. What's the first thing they should do to kind of start improving that and start increasing engagement and making the presentations more effective?
Well, just the fact that they would have that impetus is huge. And such it makes me think that person must be in the marketing area or something. Usually those are the people we got to change these presentations. But I mean, there's endless books out there, endless YouTube videos. And I think first it depends on if this person wants to make a change within their organization, figure out who is kind of an archetype that you want to embody. You can watch TED Talks. There are keynote speakers out there. What's kind of the North Star of presentations that you'd like you'd like your organization to embody, and maybe share some videos? Because I find when I'm providing guidelines for feedback, because a big part of my classes are peer feedback. I like to, and I think you mentioned this earlier, it's helpful to just say, hey, when you spoke and you weren't looking at us, this is how I felt. And then stopping there. There's no prescriptive how to fix it. There's just like, here's how I felt, because these folks we're dealing with are super smart. They'll figure out their own solution. So if you provide, hey, I'd like to see us adding more engagement. I'd like to see us be more creative with our presentation decks. They will figure out their own way to build those, take those steps. Okay. So, or, you can hire a teacher like me, and of course, but it's not necessary. I mean, I think it's really fun once you start down that route.
Okay. So what does your training look like? You said you do some training for Google. Is it a Toastmaster style thing? Do you tailor it to the group? Just in general, what does it look like?
Well, I have a standard 12-hour, like 6 2-hour sessions class that I do. That's the standard one. And then I also have a version of that, which is technical public speaking, which I get into more of structure. The normal public speaking is more about presence, because a lot of folks already know how to structure a presentation, and there's an entire realm and world of building presentations. But technical presentations, I get more into that. Are you familiar with Barbara Minto's pyramid principle of business writing? It's kind of a classic McKinsey consulting way of structuring a problem and solution, if that's what you're presenting. But I get more into the technical public speaking. But to answer your question, there's a lot of experiential work. Like, people are speaking, people are getting feedback all the time. I give them some best practices, but we have a ton of dialogue about how does this impact your day-to-day, your week-to-week meetings, because that's the most important thing. The challenge with a lot of Toastmasters and things, you'll have these kind of highfalutin best practices. Like, you can only have 6 lines per slide, six words per line. It's like, have you ever even seen a technical presentation with 6 by 6? It's good to at least know what you should try for, but that's never going to happen. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Well, one of the things I didn't mention this when we were talking about your book a little bit earlier, but in the book you mentioned that a change in mindset, or that people need a change in mindset regarding public speaking. What is that, especially for tech people? What is that mindset change that you think is so important?
It's interesting you asked that, because I've been thinking a lot about kind of going a little bit deeper on that, because I know when I'm preparing a presentation, I'm preparing a pretty big, I'm doing a big keynote session at the Toastmasters International Convention in August, actually, and I've been working on that. And I see there's 2 levels of communication happening of what I'm building. And there's the content, right? And there's also, what am I going to do when I'm talking about this? What do my slides look like here? But then there's this second layer of content, which is my presence and how I'm interacting with the audience. How do I react when they clap? How do I react when they laugh? How do I handle mistakes? And I think both of those things, if they're almost equally important, the more I've been watching people present stuff, they can have amazing content, but if they aren't embodying it with their engagement and the way in their presence, it's just like you said, it's like, why am I even here right now? Why didn't you put this in a document and send it to me? And especially, why did I block out this specific block of time, when I have other things to do? So I think when you're talking about a change in mindset, it's like starting to split your attention on prep of beyond just the content to also your presence while you're there.
Okay. To be sure you're getting that engagement and not just spewing out the information, kind of.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to tech folks that were your audience, that's how you get jobs. Sure, you develop, tech interviews are legendary for just being brutal. But you have to have your skills together, but the way you present yourself is also incredibly important too.
Yeah. Interesting. So what, you've been doing this work for a while, and I can tell by the way you explain it and your enthusiasm that you're passionate about it. What's the favorite part of your current work?
Oh man. To be honest, like I'm working with like in a class right now, I have some non-native speakers who started so tentatively at the beginning of class. And through, I mean, I can't take credit for this, Steve. Like just simply creating a structure where they're supported and encouraged, I can see like I went from seeing 10% of a person to like 90% of this brilliant person in the span of 4 classes. And it's like, oh my God, their managers must be like, where did you come from? This is amazing. So that really like makes me excited.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So I guess on the flip side of that, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing today in working with tech companies or training their teams?
Good question. I guess this is pretty logistical, but just shifting platform, I guess. I mean, bouncing from Microsoft Teams to Zoom to Google Meet to in person, like oh my God, I gotta change my deck again. Like just the logistics of it, because we're coming out of pandemic. It's like, are we in person? Are we not? Are we hybrid? Hybrid. Steve, have you done a lot of hybrid presentations?
A few.
They are not good.
Yeah, it's hard. I guess I haven't been thinking about the word engagement, but you're trying to engage with both people in both different formats. So what do you do? How do you manage that? I mean, you can't have 2 different slide decks for the same presentation. How do you make that work?
Well, for hybrid, it adds a whole nother layer of prep because there's a lot of discussion, certainly in platform communities and also in Google and large corporations of making sure that everybody is represented properly in a meeting, because sometimes if you're in person, the hybrid people don't really get forgotten about, and maybe their input gets diminished. Or if you're the one person that's in person and then everybody else, and it's up to the moderator or the presenter to be holding all that space and being like, we need to check in with our online folks, see what they have to say. So it's just it's like an added plate to be spinning, if you will, in those meetings.
And I've been in several just as a participant where one side or the other gets ignored. And so I was in one recently where the presenter was focusing on the online, the people on the Zoom call, but I think there are just about as many people in person. And he kept saying, okay, well, put your questions into chat. What about the people in the room? They never really gave them a chance. Now, I don't know if there's a tool where that people there could get an app and be loading into chat in the physical, the meeting room. But that's important to be sure you include everybody, engage with everyone, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, we're like in process of solutions. I mean, Google Meet has something called companion mode that they're trying to do. Okay. But at the end of the day, it's up to you as presenter to think of that. The learning term is scaffolding of input, figuring out how are you going to scaffold input. Like it can, will you go to the virtual folks first and then always check in with some kind of in-person moderator with a mic or something in the room? So it just takes a little forethought.
But this has to be figured out, because this is in my opinion, our future. I mean, we're not going back to everybody just being in offices, and we're kind of past that. Everybody's only on Zoom because all the offices are closed. This hybrid's probably where it's going to be for at least quite a while. Maybe the virtual worlds that they're creating, that's going to change things again, but probably at least for the next few years, we got to be figuring this out and accommodate everybody. So
Yeah, for sure.
Question I love to ask every guest because it helps me with my own reading list. What's a favorite book that you've read recently? Can be fiction, nonfiction, whatever you like best.
Let's see. I mean, I think the one it's on my shelf over here. It's just Crucial Conversations. It's the classic business model of dealing with contentious Q&A content when moments become heated in a meeting, allowing you to step out of the contention and talk about the meeting itself or the conversation itself, and before you get back into the minutia of the conflict. I just find that to be like a really helpful model, not only for contentious conversations, but also for moderating meetings. Like if I'm presenting or if I'm moderating a Google Meet call or something like that, it can be really helpful to remember, like, oh, I can step out to a 10,000 foot view and invite everyone with me. Yeah. We don't have to stay in and like beating it out in there, yeah. And I mean, it helps when I present in tech trade shows too. Sometimes I'll have antagonistic people asking questions. And always remember, I can step back, be like, I need to, be mindful of time. Like I really I can't wait to chat with you about this after my presentation, but I want to honor everybody's schedules here in the meeting. Yeah.
That's good. That's a great way to phrase it. I have not read that book, so I will get a copy of that. I'll put a link to it in the show notes too, in case any of the listeners want to find it. So what's ahead for you for the rest of this year and into next year?
Yeah, I think I have a couple trainings with different companies, but the big deal, like I mentioned, is leading that keynote session at the Toastmasters International Convention in the Bahamas in August, which I'm very grateful to.
Quite a struggle that you have to travel to the Bahamas. Yeah.
Exactly. I'll be honest, I've never spoken in front of 1,000 people in person before, so that'll be a new level of engagement. But very excited, and I'll be talking about just this kind of stuff, more from a Toastmasters perspective, how to engage using clown tools to engage. And by that, I don't mean red nose and tripping and falling. I mean more engagement, although my pants may fall down. No, just kidding.
You've got to get at least one or two little clown aspects in there, right? Don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
But don't give it away. So, but okay, that's interesting. Well, I won't be there, but I'm sure it would be a good event, and that would be a fun venue to speak in, where you would hope most of the audience is a little bit more relaxed. It's a vacation setting, and maybe they're enjoying things a little bit more. Just put it that way. Okay.
For sure.
So I'm sure some of the listeners may have questions or want to learn more about you. I'll have a link to your book in the show notes, but how else could people reach out to you or learn more about what you do, and especially people who want to improve their speaking skills?
Sure. Well, you can reach out to me. My website is winktechtalks.com. You can sign up or at least put interest there if you're interested in a class or coaching, or you can also just reach me directly. My phone number and email is right there. Okay. And also, I wanted to offer your listeners a free exercise. If you go to doncolliver.com/tech engage, that's /tech engage, there's an exercise you can do with 4 people. And you can start working on this skill that I talk about. We're all great at working on our content, but there's also a second part, which is engaging. And this exercise forces you to kind of keep both of those plates spinning at the same time.
Okay.
It's kind of crazy. I like doing that exercise in my classes to kind of get people on their toes. But yeah, you can find that at doncolliver.com/engage or tech engage. And also I'd love to connect with everybody on LinkedIn, of course.
Okay. I will get all of those links in the show notes, so people can find it and find you and continue learning. So this has been a great call, Don. I appreciate you taking the time and sharing your wisdom, because I learned myself, as I've mentioned to you. I've got some presentations coming up, and I can use some of the tips you just shared to make mine better, hopefully. So I appreciate that. And it was fun to talk with you. It's fun to have a clown on the show for once.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been a blast.
Okay. And I hope your presentation in the Bahamas goes well. I'm sure it'll be a fun experience.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Don.